Civil liberties, as they manifest in American political culture, were designed, and I think designed very effectively, to safeguard the citizenry against tyranny. If you go back and look at when these civil liberties were first pioneered and the debates that produced them, what you find is that at the time, the founders, the American founders who wanted to form a federal union, had a huge and monumental challenge, an impediment towards that goal. And that challenge, that impediment, was that huge numbers of colonial citizens, members of the colonies, were petrified that if you actually formed a federal government and then anointed a president to oversee it, this singular figure who would preside over, with great authority, this federal government that would be distant from their state governments, that would have too much power to be able to really restrict, that what essentially you were doing was rendering inevitable a replica of the abuses of King George III that they had just waged a very risky and dangerous war to emancipate themselves from. And they were very scared that by agreeing to a federal union, that's what they would be doing. They would be creating this massive federal power that would be, in no time at all, a mirror image of the king, and not only the king, the British king, but tyrants of the past as well, of the recent past. And what assuaged those concerns, ultimately, what convinced enough people to sign on to the idea that there would be a federal union and that it made sense and that there would be a constitution to bind all colonies and then what became the states, was this idea that, hey, don't worry, because we're not going to have an unrestrained executive branch. We're not going to have an unrestrained federal government. We're going to have a long list of very rigid rules, very rigid restrictions that define exactly the limits of government power. And that, and only that, was the linchpin that convinced early Americans that this form of government that they were creating would not lead to the kinds of tyranny and abuses that they were so petrified of and that they had just waged a war to escape from. They knew that in the absence of that list, in the absence of a meaningful list of restrictions, of meaningful civil liberties, that tyranny would be inevitable, because they understood that political power, when exercised without meaningful constraints, not likely, but inevitably leads to that level of tyranny. And so that was really, that's the nature of civil liberties and how it arose. So if you look at what civil liberties are designed to accomplish and the function that they are supposed to play and the irreplaceable value that they offer and the evils and the dangers that they alone can ward off, that doesn't seem to me to be an ancillary or secondary concern for political debates. That seems to me to be pretty fundamental.